Ever wanted to see our determined hero charge headlong into the most perilous showdown of her life? Here it is. In this explosive twist, Marina Krause's relentless hunt for answers collides with Regulus's final gambit, pushing every ally and enemy to their limit. We're about to reveal clandestine alliances, narrow escapes, and a confrontation that threatens to blow open everything we thought we knew. Will Marina's fierce resolve be enough to uproot a powerful Black Ops empire? Or will Regulus strike first, silencing her story forever? If you're hooked and curious to find out who survives the onslaught, or whether Marina's discovered intel finally sees the light of day, don't miss the rest of this thrilling tale. And while you're here, remember to subscribe to our channel so you'll never miss another heart-pounding installment. Your support fuels more stories filled with action, mystery, and the ultimate fight for justice. Marina Krause traced her fingertips along the edges of the day's receipts, a stack of slips that smelled faintly of coffee beans and pastry sugar. The Rusty Rose Cafe, which she had owned and managed for nearly 2 years, was nearly silent at this late hour. Its only soundtrack the occasional drip from the espresso machine and the soft hum of lights overhead. Outside, a flickering street lamp cast a pool of yellowish light onto the sidewalk, illuminating the entrance. It was well past closing time, and nearly everyone else in this sleepy part of the city had long since gone to bed. Marina, however, had never been the sort of person to follow a routine schedule. She found comfort in these quiet hours, in tasks that allowed her to occupy her hands and clear her mind. At her feet lay Buck, a golden retriever whose glossy coat showed subtle streaks of white around the muzzle, a sign that, like Marina, he was not as young as he used to be. Despite his age, Buck's ears twitched at the faintest noise, and every now and then he would shift, letting out a small huff as though on high alert. Marina couldn't help but smile at the dog's behavior. Once upon a time, when she lived a life defined by rigid schedules and danger, Buck's vigilance had been an asset rather than a quirk. Those were days she tried to forget, a past she'd tucked away the moment she set foot in this city. Now she was known merely as the quiet cafe owner who wore a perpetual half-smile and served excellent cappuccinos. She hoped that was all anyone would ever need to know. Her gaze flicked to the chalkboard menu that still listed the day's specials: a sweet hazelnut latte, a spiced chai, and a new pastry she'd been experimenting with. All of it was so very normal compared to the storms that had once raged in her life. She breathed in deeply, savoring the mingled scent of coffee grounds, baked bread, and that intangible sense of calm she had learned to appreciate. If someone had told her 5 years ago that she'd find solace in a quiet corner of a bustling city, her only concerns the fresh stock of coffee beans and perfecting her scone recipe, she wouldn't have believed it. But that night, as she finished balancing the register and carefully noted down the day's totals, a small, creeping unease slithered into her gut. Something about the stillness outside seemed off, almost too perfect. Buck's ears perked, and his tail gave a single stiff wag before settling into an alert stance. Marina paused in mid-calculation. She had learned long ago to trust the signals Buck gave. He was rarely wrong. Shrugging off a tingle of nerves, she placed the stack of receipts aside and decided that it was time to lock up. But in the process of making her way through the darkened cafe, ready to turn off the last set of lights and secure the back door, Marina heard a noise. It was faint, perhaps the distant scrape of metal on metal. Then she heard a dull thud, as though something had fallen outside. Her heart rate spiked for a moment, and she felt a nagging sense of déjà vu. It had been a long time since she'd needed to worry about stealthy intruders or the possibility of forced entry. Still, she responded on pure instinct, reaching beneath the counter to where she kept a small concealed pistol for emergencies. In the quiet gloom, she felt the weight of the weapon settle into her hand. Turning toward the back room, she mouthed to Buck to stay close. In that single breath, she felt the old part of her stirring to life, the part that knew how to move silently, how to hide in shadows, and how to aim with lethal accuracy. Marina edged toward the back of the cafe, her worn sneakers pressing into the tile with the utmost care to avoid sound. She had never told her regulars or her few acquaintances in town what she used to be. They only saw an older woman with a lean, athletic frame, a warm smile, and eyes that suggested some unspoken history. None of them knew she had been a sniper, a lethal shot capable of taking down targets from unimaginable distances in her previous life. And that ignorance was precisely how she preferred it. Tonight, however, it seemed her past was unwilling to remain buried. Buck padded along behind her, the nails of his paws clicking lightly on the tile floor. She paused when she heard another subtle noise. Footsteps, muffled but definitely inside the building. A flash of anger surged through her. Whoever had broken in had crossed a line. The rusty rose represented her fresh start, the sanctuary she had painstakingly built, day by day, to distance herself from the violence that once shadowed her every move. Yet here someone was, tearing into her safe space. Softly, carefully, she peered through the doorway that led into the back kitchen. She caught a glimpse of movement, a shadow crossing the moonlit floor, accompanied by the swift rummaging of metal against wood. Then she saw a second figure join the first, both of them hunched over in silent cooperation. They were rummaging through her storage racks, pushing aside flour and sugar containers as if looking for something specific. Marina's stomach twisted. They weren't petty thieves. Everything about their posture told her they were after something with purpose. Quiet as a ghost, Marina slipped deeper into the kitchen. The intruders hadn't heard her yet. One of them whispered, "Check near the cooler, it might be hidden." The other responded in equally hushed tones, "We don't have much time. Hurry up." These men were methodical, and she recognized their precision immediately. This was not some random burglary. They had a mission, and that realization filled her with a storm of questions. Who sent them? What were they after? Did they know who she truly was? Buck let out a low, throaty growl. Marina tensed. She had hoped he could remain silent, but the dog's protective instincts had always been strong. One of the intruders spun around, shining a small flashlight that momentarily scanned across the stainless steel countertops. Marina ducked behind a metal rack, heart pounding. Even after all these years, she was no stranger to the adrenal spike of conflict. She fought the urge to confront them head on. Her training reminded her that surprising them would be crucial, but Buck was no longer content to hide. Sensing the threat, the faithful dog bounded around the corner, snarling. "Dog!" one intruder yelled, a jolt of panic in his voice. Marina emerged at the same instant, firearm at the ready. She squeezed off a single shot, catching the man's flashlight arm. He cursed, dropping the flashlight and clutching his injured wrist. Glass and metal clattered onto the tile as the light rolled into a corner, still flickering. The second intruder was already lashing out, brandishing a switchblade. Buck lunged, sinking his teeth into the assailant's calf. With a vicious jerk, the man spun and slashed downward, the blade catching Buck's side. Marina's heart seized as she saw the steel slice into the dog's golden fur. She fired a second shot, taking the attacker in the shoulder. He stumbled backward, but his blow had already landed. Buck let out a pained yelp and dropped to the ground, his breathing ragged. In an instant, Marina became the woman she once was, calm, lethal, and propelled by a cold surge of protective rage. Adrenaline thundered in her veins. She sprinted to Buck, kneeling beside him just long enough to confirm that he was still alive, though bleeding heavily. The wounded intruder was trying to scramble away, hand pressed to his shoulder. His accomplice, the one with the injured wrist, was also struggling to regain his footing. Both men exchanged a frantic glance, and she recognized that look. It was the look of people who knew they were outmatched. "You messed with the wrong place," she hissed, voice tight with anger. She aimed her pistol again, but the men kicked over a rack of metal pans, creating a deafening crash that served as a diversion. One of them tossed a canister onto the floor. Marina recognized the hiss of tear gas or some variant. Fumes began to fill the small kitchen, stinging her eyes and throat. Blinded by the sudden chemical burn, she choked, reaching out for Buck. He whined, pressing closer to her leg. The intruders took advantage of her disorientation, bolting for the back door. By the time Marina wiped her streaming eyes and made it through the swirling fumes, they were gone, disappearing into the darkness beyond the parking lot. She could faintly hear the roar of an engine before it faded into the distance. Outside, only the broken lock on her back door and a scatter of footprints in the dirt remained as evidence of their incursion. She coughed again, turning her attention back to her wounded dog. Blood matted Buck's fur. Despite the intense pain, he tried to wag his tail at her, as if to reassure her that he was still there, still fighting. Marina gently pressed her hands around the gash, remembering every field medic lesson she had ever learned in her old life. The gash was deep, and Buck's breathing was shallow. She scooped him up as carefully as she could, tears welling up as she felt the warm stickiness of blood coat her arms. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, cradling him. She hurried to her car parked behind the cafe, gently placing Buck on the passenger seat. There was a 24-hour veterinary clinic about 10 minutes away, a drive she had hoped never to make under dire circumstances. She started the car, heart pounding, adrenaline firing through her nerves. As the vehicle sped through dimly lit streets, she could almost feel the metallic tang of that old life settling into her system once again. The sense of threat, the readiness for violence, the knowledge that she could handle herself in a crisis, these were things she had tried to bury. Now they surfaced with a vengeance. Buck let out a feeble whimper, and Marina clenched the steering wheel harder. She refused to let him die. She pressed the accelerator to the floor, tires squealing around corners. It felt like a bad dream, one from which she couldn't wake. But if anyone knew how to fight against overwhelming odds, it was her. When she arrived at the clinic, the veterinarian on call rushed to help. Buck was carried inside on a stretcher, leaving Marina in the waiting room, covered in blood and trembling with fury. She paced the small reception area, replaying every detail of the break-in, mentally cataloging everything the intruders had done. They knew exactly where to look. They had rummaged through her storage as if following a lead, not searching at random. Whatever they were after was inside her cafe, and they had nearly killed her dog to get it. That night stretched into the early hours of morning. Every tick of the wall clock in the veterinary clinic's waiting room felt like a knife twisting in Marina's gut. She could do nothing but wait, covered in drying blood, her eyes still watering from the residual effects of the tear gas. A swirl of fear, anger, and heartbreak gnawed at her. She tried to calm herself by focusing on the steady beep of a nearby monitor in the treatment area, but every beep was a reminder that Buck's survival was on the line. Eventually, the veterinarian emerged, pulling off blood-stained gloves. Marina braced herself for the worst, her heart hammering against her ribs. "He's stable for now," the vet said, keeping her voice calm and professional. "We stitched up the laceration. The blood loss was significant, but he's a strong dog, and it looks like you got him here just in time." Marina sagged in relief, feeling the tension in her muscles weaken. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice almost breaking. The vet gave her a compassionate nod, adding that Buck would need to stay overnight for observation. As much as Marina wanted to stay by his side, she knew she had work to do. The intruders wouldn't stop just because she had survived. They would come back, or worse, they would vanish until they could strike again. She needed to take action. She left the clinic with her clothing stained and her mind ablaze with thoughts. Driving back to the Rusty Rose, she kept glancing at the seat next to her, half expecting to see Buck's familiar silhouette. The absence cut deeply. When she arrived at the cafe, the damage was evident. The back door's lock had been completely destroyed, and inside, the kitchen floor was scattered with the remnants of the fight. A fine haze of chemical residue still floated in the air, stinging her nostrils. Marina stepped carefully through the debris, picking up the flashlight one of the intruders had dropped. Its casing was dented, and on one side she found a smudge of blood, likely from the man she had shot. "At least one of them isn't walking away unscathed," she muttered to herself. For a moment she contemplated calling the police. Yet after her old life experiences, she wasn't entirely convinced that local law enforcement could, or would, help in a meaningful way. More importantly, she wanted answers, not bureaucratic red tape. She returned to the front counter, where she kept a hidden cell phone, a burner phone from her past. It had gathered dust in a locked cabinet, a memento of a life she had sworn she would never revisit. She pulled it out, turned it on, and waited for the screen to flicker to life. There was no question in her mind whom she needed to call. Jonas Hayes was the only person she still trusted from her old circle. He specialized in extracting information that others tried to bury. Pressing the phone to her ear, she stepped outside into the cool night air, inhaling a lungful of city smells. Asphalt, faint exhaust, and the lingering tang of burnt coffee from her own shop. The line rang twice before Jonas's voice answered on the other end, sounding half amused, half concerned. Well, I didn't think I'd see your name pop up on my caller ID again," Jonas drawled. his tone carrying the familiar blend of nonchalance and guarded curiosity that had once made him an excellent field asset. Even through a simple phone call, Marina could envision him leaning against a cluttered desk somewhere, perhaps in some safe house or dingy apartment, scanning multiple computer monitors. He was the kind of person who always seemed to be one step ahead, someone who thrived on secrets and half-truths. "I'm not going to apologize for calling," Marina replied quietly, pacing around the back of her cafe. "I need information." "You usually do," Jonas said, his voice tightening slightly. "So what is it this time? And don't tell me you're still planning to stay off the grid, because that phone you're using, well, let's just say it's not as secure as it used to be." Marina sighed, aware that the device was several years old. It had originally been loaded with top-tier encryption, but technology advanced quickly in certain circles. "I had unexpected visitors," she began, hesitating only briefly as she glanced through the back door where the tear gas residue still clung to surfaces. "They tore up the place and nearly killed Buck. They were looking for something, I have no idea what, but they knew exactly where to look." "Professionals?" Jonas's tone shifted, losing its casual air. She could practically hear the gears turning in his mind. "Seemed that way. They didn't bother with the register or the visible valuables. They went straight for the storage area, rifling through boxes, containers, like they had intel that I was hiding something. Problem is, I'm not hiding anything here that I know of." Marina felt a fresh stab of frustration. "I need to find out who they are, who sent them, and how to stop them." Jonas let out a low hum of thought. "I can start digging around, but you and I both know this might lead to some uncomfortable places, especially if you've really left that life behind." "I don't have a choice, Jonas," she said firmly. "They attacked me in my own cafe and nearly took Buck from me. I won't stand down." He paused, perhaps weighing whether to warn her or question her further. Instead, he gave a succinct response. "All right, send me anything you can remember. Details of their gear, how they moved, what they said. Also, if you have any bullet casings or footprints you can photograph, do it. The more data I have, the faster I can trace these ghosts." "Thank you," she breathed, her tension easing slightly. "And Jonas, be discreet. I don't want them to know I'm on to them." "They already know that, Marina. You survived. In their playbook, that means you're a threat." His voice softened for the first time during the call. "You be careful. And for what it's worth, I'm sorry about your dog." Before she could respond, he ended the call. Marina stood there, phone in hand, staring at the shattered lock on her cafe door. A threat. She had spent years avoiding that label, wanting only to serve coffee and build a small, peaceful life. Now, that illusion lay crumpled at her feet. She felt her hands clenching into fists. If she was a threat to them, she'd make sure they regretted underestimating her. By the time dawn broke, Marina had cleaned up the immediate mess in the cafe. She wasn't sure when she had last slept, but exhaustion felt secondary to rage-fueled determination. Strangely enough, despite the swirling chaos in her mind, she found herself feeling more centered than she had in a long time. Tending to Buck's bloodstains on the kitchen floor, she moved with swift efficiency. The act of scrubbing helped her focus, reminding her of the times she had sanitized gear after a mission in her former profession. It was a terrible parallel, but it served to remind her of what she was capable of. When she finally sat down, rummaging through her own mental catalog of possible connections or hidden stashes from her past, she realized that nothing about her new life should have attracted attention. She had made a clean break. No flashy acquisitions, no suspicious contacts, just the everyday routine of running a small business. Whatever these intruders were after, they either thought she possessed something valuable, or they had the wrong intel. Yet they'd come prepared, clearly knowing more about her than she did about them. She opened a small safe hidden under the front counter, half expecting to find some relic of her old life that she might have forgotten. There were only the cafe's insurance papers, emergency cash, and an unmarked envelope containing a single piece of identification for Marina Kraus, the identity she had meticulously built upon leaving her old world. Satisfied that nothing was missing, she locked it back up. She then double-checked the rest of the cafe, rummaging through the shelves the intruders had overturned. Flour, sugar, coffee beans, cleaning supplies. Nothing looked disturbed apart from being tossed onto the floor. It baffled her that these men would break in just to rummage through items that had no obvious value. With the morning light streaming in, she opened her phone to snap pictures of every relevant detail. The footprints left near the back door, the bullet casings from her shots, the scattered debris. She then forwarded them to Jonas using a secure messaging app that barely still functioned on her old burner phone. There was a grim sense of finality in those actions, as though she was sending a signal flare to the past. I'm still here, and I'm not backing down. Her next call was to the cafe's manager, a college student named Zara who helped run the place on weekends. Marina informed her that the cafe would be closed for repairs for the next few days. Zara offered to come over and help, but Marina insisted that she handle it alone, citing a plumbing emergency that was too dangerous for an untrained person to deal with. She hated lying, but the alternative would involve telling Zara about armed intruders and a dog nearly dying. Marina didn't want any more innocent people in danger. This was her fight. Later that morning, she returned to the veterinary clinic. Buck was awake, but clearly drained. The veterinarian explained that he would need a few days of rest and continued observation, but they felt optimistic about his recovery. Marina sat beside Buck's kennel, gently stroking his head, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. She whispered soothing words, promising him that she would keep him safe from now on. In the back of her mind, however, she knew that as long as these attackers roamed free, neither she nor Buck were truly safe. She spent over an hour there, quietly discussing Buck's treatment with the vet and ensuring any cost would be covered. At one point, as she watched the rhythmic rise and fall of Buck's chest, an unsettling thought crossed her mind. What if they come back here? What if they realize Buck is still alive? The possibility chilled her. She asked the vet about security at the clinic. Though the building had standard locks and a basic alarm system, it wasn't a fortress. Reluctantly, Marina concluded that she couldn't keep Buck in hiding forever, yet removing him prematurely could endanger his recovery. The only solace was that these intruders seemed to have retreated for now, likely to lick their wounds and regroup. Marina checked her phone as she headed back to the parking lot. Jonas had already sent her multiple messages. She leaned against her car, scanning through his findings. He had dug into local hospital admissions for gunshot wounds, a typical lead to follow after a firefight. Strangely, nothing had popped up. That likely meant these attackers had their own private medical resources or traveled outside the city for care. Jonas had also identified the partial brand of tear gas canister she'd described, narrowing it down to a handful of suppliers that dealt in surplus or black market paramilitary gear. Not a conclusive trail, but something. Jonas's final message read, "Meet me at the den tonight, 11 p.m. If we're doing this, we do it face to face." The den was a bar on the outskirts of the city, a place Jonas frequented when he needed to make quiet deals or trade information. It was too public for a trap, but not so crowded that you couldn't have a private conversation. Marina glanced at her watch. It was early afternoon, giving her plenty of time to prepare. She drove back to the Rusty Rose, stepped inside, and locked the door behind her. There, in the hush of her own space, she opened a small storage closet near the office. Inside lay a single duffel bag she hadn't touched in years. She hesitated, hand trembling on the zipper. The bag contained her old field gear, a compact sniper rifle disassembled in foam casing, a sidearm similar to the one she'd used last night, ammunition, and various tactical accessories. She had hoped never to open it again. Yet as she pulled the zipper back and stared at the contents, she felt that grim certainty coiling in her chest. They came after Buck and me. They won't stop. I have to end this. She began methodically cleaning and reassembling the rifle, the motion so ingrained in muscle memory that her fingers barely needed her conscious direction. Night fell slowly on the city's skyline, the smudges of orange and pink from sunset fading into the darker hues of twilight. By 10:30 p.m., Marina was en route to the den, her gear secured in the trunk of her car. She had no intention of causing trouble at Jonas's chosen meeting spot, but she refused to be caught off guard again. Her senses felt sharp, as if every street lamp and passing car could harbor a potential threat. The old paranoia that had once kept her alive was back, and it hummed through her veins like electricity. The den was a nondescript building tucked between a closed pawn shop and a sketchy auto repair garage. Its neon sign flickered, casting an eerie glow onto the empty sidewalk. Marina parked a few spaces away, scanning her surroundings before stepping out of her vehicle. She noted two figures smoking near a street corner, but they seemed more interested in their own conversation than in her. Still, she kept her guard up as she walked to the entrance. Inside, the bar was dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of stale beer and lingering smoke. A jukebox in the corner churned out a bluesy tune that matched the atmosphere perfectly, low and somber. The bartender gave Marina a brief nod of recognition. He might not know her name, but Jonas had been here enough times to vouch for her by proxy. She spotted Jonas in a booth near the back, his laptop open on the table, the screen reflecting off his glasses. She slid into the booth opposite him. "Busy night?" she asked quietly, glancing at the half-empty glass of whiskey beside his laptop. He smirked. "You know me. Any night I'm not stuck in a war zone of code or crossfire is a vacation." With a subtle tilt of his head, he gestured for her to check the immediate area for eavesdroppers. Marina scanned the bar, 3 men playing pool, a couple in a corner booth, the bored bartender, and the 2 smokers who had now drifted in. No one seemed overtly interested in them. "All right," Jonas said, lowering his voice. I took a deeper look. "Your intruders might be affiliated with a local network of enforcers that handle specialized retrievals. They're sometimes contracted by bigger organizations. Could be corporate espionage, could be something else. One name kept popping up in my search. Lucius Madera. He's an underworld fixer, or at least that's what people think. Very hush-hush. He's rumored to run a small but ruthless crew that deals with sensitive acquisitions." Marina tensed. "Madera. I've never heard of him." Jonas shrugged. "I'm not surprised. He keeps a low profile, rarely gets his hands dirty. But his men, they do a lot of dirty work. If he's the one who sent them, it means they had a specific reason to believe you possess something valuable. Or someone lied to them," she offered. But Jonas shook his head. "They seemed too prepared. This wasn't random. There's more. They've been looking for a lockbox or some sealed container associated with an old operation called Regulus. Ring any bells?" The name triggered an old memory at the edge of her mind, something she once heard in passing during her final missions. She swallowed hard. "Maybe. I'd have to dig into my old files to be sure." Jonas leaned in. "Whatever Regulus is, Madera wants it, badly." Marina's gaze hardened. "Then he's made a serious mistake. He nearly killed my dog. I want to know where to find him." Jonas's eyes flicked to his laptop screen, and he tapped a few keys, rotating it slightly so she could see. "I've got a lead on a warehouse by the docks, Dock 17. Madera uses it for contraband shipments under a shell company. If you want to find him, that's the place to start. But I'd advise caution. The man doesn't mess around, and if he has ties to Regulus, you're swimming in deeper waters than you realize." Marina suppressed the urge to recoil at the mention of the docks. She had left behind a life of covert infiltration and bullet-laden missions, but it appeared she was about to plunge right back into it. "I can handle it," she said, her voice low yet steady. "I just need to get close enough to confirm he's there and get some answers." Jonas nodded. "I've done some recon. Security's tight, rotating patrols, motion sensors, and rumored armed guards. You're not walking in unannounced, at least not without a plan." He pointed to the blueprint on his screen, showing multiple entry points, including a side door near stacked shipping containers that might offer some cover. Marina studied the layout intently. Her mind automatically slid into a tactical mode, analyzing vantage points, potential blind spots, and possible exit routes. Her old self, the sniper who thrived on strategy, awakened. "There's a security camera here," she said, pointing to a corner. "I'll need a way to loop its feed or knock it out." "I can handle that remotely if you give me a heads up right before you move in," Jonas offered. "Assuming their system hasn't changed frequencies in the last month." She gave a curt nod. "I'll do some surveillance first. If Buck's stable enough for me to step away for a few hours, I'll head there tomorrow night." Jonas's mouth tightened into a thin line. "Listen, you and I both know Madera is dangerous. He's got connections that can turn the city against you in a heartbeat. The men you encountered were probably just the tip of the iceberg. If you go after him, you might be setting yourself up for a full-scale war." A flicker of anger sparked in Marina's eyes. "He already declared war the moment he stepped foot in my cafe. He put Buck in the hospital." I'm not waiting around for him to strike again. I'll bring the fight to his doorstep. Jonas exhales slowly. All right, then we do this carefully. I'll keep an ear on the police channels and local chatter. You make your move, gather intel, and get out. Don't try to topple him in one go. If we can prove he's after you based on bogus intel, maybe we can cut off his resources. Marina stood sliding out of the booth. I'm going to do whatever it takes to make sure he never lays a finger on what's mine again. Jonas nodded, packing up his laptop. I'll await your signal. Good hunting, Marina. She left the den with renewed resolve, stepping back into the night air. The chill that brushed against her skin felt oddly invigorating. The woman who once thrived on stealth and marksmanship was fully awakened now, and this time the fight was personal. Returning to her apartment above the rusty rose, Marina spent a restless night planning her approach. She laid out blueprints, scribbled notes, and cross-referenced everything Jonas had told her. Sleep came in short fits, and when she closed her eyes, she dreamed of old missions gone wrong, shadows in alleyways, and the echo of her heartbeat in her ears. Each time she jolted awake, she found herself half reaching for a weapon that wasn't there, only to remember she was alone in her bedroom. By morning, she had formed a tentative plan. She would first scout Dock 17 in the evening, identify the security weaknesses, and see if there was a vantage point from which she could gather intel on Madeira's movements. Then, if the situation looked manageable, she'd make her move the following night. She would rely on Jonas to knock out or loop any crucial surveillance feeds. All the while, she'd keep her phone on silent, waiting for any call from the veterinary clinic about Buck's condition. Around midday, a message from the vet confirmed that Buck was stabilizing well. Though he still needed rest, it meant Marina could slip away for a few hours without feeling as though she were abandoning him in critical condition. She took comfort in the fact that, for the moment, Buck was in safe hands. She promised the clinic she'd return later that evening to check on him again before heading to the docks. Before leaving, Marina carefully packed a smaller, less conspicuous bag with the essentials: her disassembled rifle, sidearm, extra magazines, and a few tactical gadgets left over from her old life. She tucked them away in the trunk of her car, beneath a layer of groceries and a spare tire, just enough camouflage should anyone decide to snoop around. Though she hated the notion of returning to lethal methods, she had to be prepared for anything. Half measures could get her killed. The drive to the docks took her through parts of the city she rarely visited: an industrial zone with looming cranes, rows of shipping containers, and rusted chain-link fences. She parked in a derelict lot several blocks away, choosing to approach on foot. The hum of cargo trucks and forklifts, along with the distant roar of the water, set an ominous backdrop. She moved carefully along a side street, blending in with the occasional workers and passers-by. In her jeans and a black hoodie, she looked more like a down-on-her-luck warehouse clerk than a highly trained sniper. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky with hues of purple and orange, she reached a vantage point across from Dock 17. Crouching behind a row of abandoned shipping containers, she raised a small pair of binoculars and surveyed the scene. Guards patrolled the perimeter, a few cameras panned back and forth. She spotted a large warehouse door where trucks entered and exited. A sleek black sedan was parked near the entrance, flanked by two men who looked like they'd stepped out of a bodyguard recruitment poster. Marina observed for nearly an hour, watching the shift changes and the flow of workers. On one side of the building, she noticed a smaller door, likely an employee entrance, where a single guard stood looking bored, occasionally checking his phone. If she could slip by him, it might be her best chance of getting in undetected. However, that door was also under the gaze of a security camera perched on a tall metal pole. A direct approach would require Jonas to loop the feed. She also spied a possible rooftop entry where a maintenance ladder was partially concealed by stacked crates. If she could gain access to the roof, she might avoid some of the patrolling guards altogether, but she'd have to watch out for any rooftop security features. Either way, stealth was imperative. Getting pinned down in a firefight here, surrounded by Madeira's men, would be suicide. From her hidden vantage point, she caught a glimpse of a tall man stepping out of the black sedan. Although she couldn't see him clearly from the angle, the way the guards snapped to attention hinted that he was important. He disappeared into the warehouse, escorted by two heavily armed men. Could that be Lucius Madeira, she wondered, her heart skipping a beat. If it was, then she was closer than she had dared hope. She quietly snapped pictures with her phone, sending them to Jonas with a short message. Spotted a possible high-value target. Tall, mid-40s, short dark hair, strong build. Will confirm she kept her phone on silent, glancing occasionally to see if Jonas would respond. After a few minutes, she received a text. Match is likely. Stay in position. I'm tapping the internal comms if I can. Marina exhaled slowly, feeling that familiar tension of an operation about to begin. She checked her watch. She would give it another hour at least before she made any move. The darkness would give her more cover. In the meantime, she kept eyes on the entrances, methodically counting guard rotations. The pattern repeated every 15 minutes, with pairs of men circling the building, meeting briefly at designated points, then splitting again. She noted every detail, mental notes stacking up, until she was confident she could slip in between patrols if Jonas took care of the cameras. Eventually, dusk gave way to full night. Lights in the dock area cast harsh shadows on the concrete, while the warehouse itself glowed from within like a beacon of illicit activity. The forklift engines rumbled, punctuating the low hum of conversation among the guards. A few gulls screeched overhead, scavenging in dumpsters for scraps. Amid that mundane industrial noise, Marina steeled herself, focusing on the plan. She slipped her phone from her pocket and typed, "Ready when you are. Kill the cameras in 2 minutes." Jonas's quick reply, "Copy that. Watch yourself." Marina inhaled one steady breath, then moved. She felt the old instincts sliding into place, the stealth in her step, the hyper-awareness of every shift in the environment, the sense of calm that accompanied a well-executed infiltration. For a brief, chilling moment, it was as if she'd never left the field. Timing was everything. As soon as Jonas texted that the camera feeds were looping, Marina left her vantage point and darted across a patch of open ground, sticking to shadows behind a row of stacked pallets. Overhead, a single floodlight illuminated part of the yard, but she managed to skirt around its outer edge. Heart pounding, she reached the maintenance ladder she'd eyed earlier. She glanced around to confirm no guard was watching, then climbed swiftly, each rung creaking faintly under her weight. Every muscle in her body tensed with memory, recalling other nights on other rooftops. But she forced herself to focus solely on the present. Up top, the warehouse roof was relatively flat, dotted with vents and large HVAC units. She crouched low and scanned the area. No sign of guards posted here, but that didn't mean there wouldn't be sensors. Step by careful step, she moved toward a skylight she had marked from the ground. Sure enough, it offered a direct view into a high walkway running along the warehouse's interior. Light spilled from below, and she could hear the faint hum of machinery. As quietly as possible, she tested the skylight's latch. Locked, but not alarmed. At least, she didn't see any wiring. She used a small pry tool from her bag, wincing when the metal made a slight squeal as it gave way. Slipping the skylight open, she peered down. A metal catwalk stretched about 30 feet beneath her. She could see a cluster of armed men near the center of the warehouse, gathered around a large shipping container. A forklift trundled by, carrying what appeared to be crates labeled with foreign text. On a raised platform to the left, a couple of men in suits, likely Madera's inner circle, were in heated discussion, though she couldn't catch the words. She tied a short length of rope to a roof vent, securing the knot before lowering herself into the warehouse. The catwalk rattled when she dropped the last few feet, but the noise was swallowed by the general din below. She stayed prone, scanning for any sign she'd been noticed. Satisfied she remained invisible, she crawled along the catwalk's narrow width until she found a vantage point that allowed her to see more clearly. Below, a man she recognized from her earlier sighting near the sedan was barking orders. Even from this distance, his presence was commanding. He had that aura of someone accustomed to giving orders and being obeyed without question. Though she couldn't hear his exact words, she picked up fragments. "Tomorrow night. Transport. Not a mistake." Her adrenaline spiked at the possibility this was indeed Lucius Madera. Marina fished out a small directional microphone from her bag, affixing an earpiece to catch any crucial bits of conversation. She inched it into position through the metal grate. The clarity wasn't perfect, but she caught Madera's voice. "The package is still out there. I need it. I don't care who stands in the way. He gestured at one of his lieutenants. Your men said the cafe owner, what's her name, Kraus? She didn't have it? One of the men nodded, glancing at his bandaged wrist. Marina's blood ran cold. So this was the group that had broken into her place. They nearly killed Buck for some package? Madera continued, voice dripping with menace. I don't buy it. She's hiding something. Find her, or find where she stashed it. We have limited time before Regulus demands results. Marina felt a pulse of both anger and confusion at the mention of Regulus. It confirmed Jonas's intel. Madera was working under some bigger umbrella, or at least in partnership with a dangerous organization. Quietly, she pressed the microphone closer, trying to catch every word. We'll handle it, said the bandaged man. But she's not ordinary, boss. She shot 2 of us. One of them's still in bad shape. Madera's lip curled in frustration. I don't care if she's the Queen of England. You should have put a bullet in her head and taken what we came for. If she's alive, she's a liability. He turned away, snapping at another subordinate. Double the security. We move out to the next location in 72 hours. I want no mistakes. The forklift rumbled by again, momentarily drowning out their voices. Marina strained to hear more, but she only caught a final snippet from Madera before he strode off into a side corridor. Get me the location of her dog. If it's still alive, it might be the leverage we need. A jolt of fear and rage coursed through her. The nerve of these people, threatening Buck once more. She ground her teeth, determined now more than ever to end this. She debated whether to take a shot right then and there, but there were too many guards, and Madera had already vanished down the corridor. Firing a single bullet from the catwalk might take one man out, but she'd never escape the ensuing chaos. She needed to be smarter. The bandaged man and 2 other lieutenants began discussing immediate plans. They rattled off addresses and times for shifts, referencing a secondary stash that needed to be moved. Marina committed every detail to memory. They're relocating soon, she noted. If she missed this window, Madera might slip away entirely. She carefully inched her microphone back, stowing it in her bag. Peering through the grate once more, she saw an open ledger on a table below. Lists of items, codes, and possibly transaction records. It was the kind of evidence that could tie Madera to a network of criminal dealings, maybe even lead to Regulus if they were as closely linked as suspected. But she couldn't get to it easily, not without a confrontation. She'd have to come back better prepared or find a quieter way. For now, she had heard enough to confirm Madera's involvement and learned that he was after something tied to Regulus. What package do they think I have, she wondered. As far as she knew, her old life had never involved any physical object valuable enough to launch a full-scale operation. Yet Madera seemed convinced otherwise. An abrupt burst of static from her earpiece made Marina freeze. Then she realized it was Jonas trying to communicate through their makeshift channel. Keeping as still as possible, she listened. Marina, I'm detecting spikes in their internal comm network. Did something happen? The faint urgency in Jonas's voice suggested they were picking up on her presence. Or maybe there was some other commotion. She crouched lower, spotting a pair of guards on the catwalk's far side. They hadn't noticed her yet, but if she stayed much longer, she'd be trapped. Time to go, she told herself. Easing backward on her belly, she made her way to the rope. Every second felt excruciatingly slow, her senses on high alert for any sign that someone had looked up or heard a clang of metal. Finally, she reached the rope, pulling herself up, hand over hand. Her arms ached, reminding her of how she'd neglected rigorous training since retiring. Once she emerged onto the rooftop, she closed the skylight as quietly as possible and recoiled the rope. The crisp night air greeted her, a stark contrast to the tense heat inside. She didn't linger, hastily retracing her route across the roof. She descended the maintenance ladder, nearly losing her footing in her rush. At the bottom, she pressed against the shadows of the shipping containers, taking a moment to breathe. A group of workers walked by, chatting loudly. Marina seized the opportunity to blend in behind them, using their movement as cover until she could slip into the darkness outside the warehouse gates. When she finally reached her car, adrenaline still coursed through her hands trembling slightly as she unlocked the door. She tossed her bag into the passenger seat and fished out her phone, responding to Jonas with a terse text. I'm out, safe. We need to talk, soon. Her heart was still hammering when she started the engine. She drove in silence for a few blocks, mind racing over everything she had learned. Madeira was determined, methodical, and well-resourced. He believed she possessed some critical item linked to Regulus. He was also bold enough to think about targeting Buck again for leverage. The very thought made her stomach twist with dread and fury. Instead of heading straight home, she decided to check on Buck at the clinic. By now it was late, but she had the after-hours number. They recognized her urgency and let her in briefly. Buck lay resting, an IV drip in his paw. His eyes opened at the sound of her footsteps, tail giving a weak wag. Marina knelt beside him, relief washing over her. She whispered soft reassurances, promising she'd keep him safe. Though he was sedated, his gaze felt trusting, as though he believed in her absolute ability to protect him. But after what she had seen at Dock 17, Marina knew this was no simple grudge or passing threat. She was up against a professional criminal network tied to an even darker operation called Regulus. And she had a sinking feeling that the deeper she dug, the more lethal this confrontation would become. Yet there was no turning back. Not after they had nearly killed Buck. Not after they had violated her sanctuary. Her path was set. She would hunt Lucius Madeira and tear apart the network that stood behind him, piece by piece. Marina Kraus pressed her forehead against the cool glass pane of the veterinary clinic's observation window, fighting the gnawing sense of dread in her chest. Buck lay on a metal examination table in the next room, surrounded by sterile instruments in the soft glow of overhead lights. Two veterinary assistants hovered over him, adjusting tubes and bandages. The veterinarian, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, murmured updates, though Marina could not catch every word. Through the thick glass, she could see Buck's chest rise and fall in shallow, unsteady motions. His eyelids flickered, and for a moment, it looked as though he might be dreaming. "Hold on," she pleaded silently, "just a little longer." In truth, Marina had barely slept since the break-in at her cafe. She had taken a few hours that night to do reconnaissance at Dock 17, confirming the identity of Lucius Madeira and his men. But all of that paled compared to her worry about Buck's condition. Even so, she had been harboring a small flame of hope. The veterinarian had initially told her that Buck was stable enough to potentially recover, though he was still fragile. Yet as the hours wore on, the staff's polite optimism shifted toward hushed uncertainty, leaving Marina in a vortex of anxiety. A soft chime signaled that the vet had stepped out from behind the doors. "Marina?" she called gently. Her expression was grave, and the lines on her face seemed more pronounced than before. Marina forced herself away from the window, bracing for the worst. "How is he?" Marina's voice came out as a dry whisper. The veterinarian sighed, pulling off a pair of latex gloves. "We tried everything we could. He fought hard, but the internal damage was more extensive than our initial scans showed. His organs were compromised, and the blood loss was severe. We've reached the point where we have to make a difficult decision." Those words punched the air from Marina's lungs. Difficult decision. She had heard that phrase in war zones before, usually about a comrade in critical shape. It never ended well. She swallowed hard, sensing tears prickling behind her eyes. Is there nothing else that can be done? Another procedure? A referral to a specialist? The vet shook her head, eyes brimming with sympathy. "I'm sorry, we'd need resources we don't have here. Even then, the odds would be so slim. He's in pain. We can keep him alive on machines for a short while, but..." Marina felt her world closing in. She had been prepared for shootouts, infiltration missions, and the scum of the criminal underworld. But she wasn't prepared for this. She pressed a trembling hand against her mouth, her eyes drifting back to the observation window. In that moment, every ounce of resolve she'd built seemed to crumble under the weight of grief. I'd like a moment with him," she managed to say at last. "Of course." The vet led Marina into the treatment room, the bright fluorescent lights revealing the stark truth of Buck's injuries. Bandages soaked through, tubes carrying fluids to and from his weakened body. Marina knelt beside him, gently stroking the fur on his head. The dog opened his eyes briefly, as though he recognized her presence. His breathing was shallow, strained. "Buck," she whispered, leaning close. "I'm so sorry. I should have been faster." His tail thumped once against the table in a feeble attempt at reassurance. Then the movement stilled. The veterinarian administered a final sedative. murmuring soft words of comfort as Buck's labored breathing slowed. Marina wanted to hold him, to cling to the hope that he might suddenly open his eyes and beat the odds. But the monitors told a cruel truth. His heart rate was declining, step by inevitable step. She stayed with him until the final beep signaled that his fight was over. When it was done, an unimaginable stillness settled over the room. Marina leaned in, pressing her forehead to the dog's fur, tears spilling silently onto his golden coat. All she could think of was the night she had found him as a stray, battered and shy, cowering in an alley behind a safe house she used in her old life. She had coaxed him out with a bit of dried meat, promising him safety. He had repaid her with unwavering loyalty, and in her darkest moments, he had been the single reminder that a life beyond violence was possible. Now that last vestige of peace lay silent. A faint, numb shock coursed through Marina's veins, echoing the countless times she had said her final farewells to fallen comrades. But this was different, more personal than any battlefield loss. This was her dog, the companion that had stayed by her side in every quiet moment of rebuilding. She was vaguely aware of the vet's gentle hand on her shoulder. "I'm so sorry for your loss," the woman said, voice trembling. "If there's anything I can do." Marina's jaw tightened. Anger flared deep inside her, a scorching wave that pushed aside the grief. She had known men who killed for profit, who hurt others for enjoyment or for a twisted sense of loyalty. But someone who would stab an innocent dog, that was a brand of cruelty she couldn't let stand. She murmured her thanks to the vet, wanting to be respectful despite the storm raging in her chest. In the clinic's quiet corridor, she filled out the necessary paperwork with mechanical precision, aware only of the pen's scratch across the forms. She chose to have Buck cremated, not wanting to leave him in a cold city lot. After finalizing the details, she walked out the door, still clutching the leash that had once symbolized calm Sunday walks and playful afternoons at the cafe. Outside, the dawn sky was tinged with pale gray clouds, as if mourning alongside her. Every step back to her car felt surreal. She slid into the driver's seat, resting her head on the steering wheel. The leash coiled in her hand like a memory she would never escape. She had tried forging a quiet life, pouring her energy into crafting lattes and being part of the local community. Now, that life felt as hollow as the silence beside her. Her phone buzzed. A message from Jonas read, "We need to talk about Doc 17, urgent developments." She stared at the screen, eyes still burning, and pressed the phone to her chest. They killed him. They took the one good thing left in this world. A chilling resolve settled in her gut. Now it's their turn to lose. Marina spent the next few hours in a haze. She returned to the Rusty Rose with Buck's leash still clenched in her fist. The sight of the cafe's cheerful facade felt like a slap in the face. She had chosen bright paint colors, a cozy sign, and a welcoming ambiance, all to distance herself from her old ways. Yet inside those walls, men with knives and tear gas had destroyed everything she held dear. Stepping inside, she noticed traces of the chaos that remained. Shattered glass, splintered wood, and the faint chemical smell from the night of the attack. She had cleaned most of it, but the mental scars lingered. Her grief demanded an outlet, but she had no time to wallow. Madera's men would be on the move soon, and Jonas's message sounded urgent. First, however, she carefully placed Buck's leash in a small wooden chest behind the counter, a simple act of remembrance. She stood there for a moment, exhaling a shaky breath, tears threatening to resurface. But instead of succumbing, she gathered her composure and reached for the duffel bag she had prepared, the one that contained her old sniper rifle, a sidearm, and ammunition. She had spent years forcing the sniper within her into submission. Now that side of her rushed back like a tidal wave, triggered by loss and fury. Every piece of gear was a grim companion from her past, rifle parts that she had once cleaned with methodical devotion, a sidearm whose weight felt too natural in her hand. As she strapped on the holster beneath her jacket, she recalled the unspoken vow she'd made when she arrived in this city. Never again. She had broken that vow the moment Buck was threatened. Marina got into her car, the same one she had driven to the clinic mere hours ago. This time, however, her destination was Jonas's safe apartment, a place he used when he needed privacy to broker delicate deals or to hide from prying eyes. She navigated side streets and narrow alleys until she found the inconspicuous building. The curtains were drawn, and not a single light leaked from inside. But the buzzer by the door responded when she pressed it 3 times in a prearranged pattern. She entered to find Jonas tapping away at a computer set up on a rickety table in a dimly lit living room. The pungent smell of stale takeout filled the air, mingling with the faint odor of burned electronics. "I heard," he said softly the moment she walked in, his gaze flicking to the leash protruding from her jacket pocket. "I'm sorry about Buck." She nodded, unable to muster words. He gestured for her to take a seat. "Listen, I've been monitoring Madeira's network. His men have gone quiet on standard frequencies, which means they're using an encrypted channel. I can't crack it yet, but I managed to intercept a text-based directive which references a secondary location about 2 hours from here. Looks like they're gearing up to move something big, possibly related to that same Regulus operation we keep hearing about." Marina's eyes glimmered with cold determination. "Then we follow them there and smash everything they're planning." Jonas hesitated. "Marina, Madeira's not just a local thug. He's part of a bigger web. Some of these connections lead back to private military contractors and shell corporations. If we poke the hornet's nest, you might end up facing more than a handful of goons." Her voice quivered with raw anger. "They've already taken everything from me." She felt her jaw tighten. "They're not unstoppable. I've been up against worse." Jonas leaned forward, tapping a key on his laptop to bring up a grainy satellite image. "I believe this is the site." He pointed to a large compound located on the outskirts of a rural expanse, an old industrial facility with a chain-link fence and multiple large buildings. "From what I can tell, Madeira's crew uses it as a storage and rendezvous point before transporting contraband, but it's heavily guarded. Security cameras, motion sensors, possibly armed patrols." Marina studied the image, her mind already clicking into tactical mode. "It's bigger than Dock 17, harder to infiltrate." She drummed her fingers on the edge of the rickety table, scanning the perimeter for potential weak points. "What if we don't go in quietly this time? Maybe we can disrupt the shipment, force them into the open." Jonas grimaced. "You'd be outnumbered. And if there really is a deeper network behind Madeira, you might find yourself facing reinforcements you can't handle alone. I'm not doubting your skills, but—" "I understand the risk," she said curtly, trying to rein in the caustic edge in her voice. She knew Jonas was only trying to protect her. "But they're going to keep sending people after me, after us. The only way to end this is to remove Madeira. If I can expose his connection to Regulus, maybe I can leverage that to dismantle the whole operation. Assuming Regulus doesn't close ranks and bury the evidence," Jonas noted. He rubbed his temple, sighing. "Look, I'll support you, but we should also consider rallying some backup. Are you sure you have no old contacts you can trust?" That question hung heavy in the air. Marina's mind drifted back to her final missions, the ones that ended so abruptly she scarcely had time to say goodbye to old allies. Most of them were scattered or off the grid. She had stayed in touch with no one, except Jonas. "Anyone I might call is either retired, dead, or halfway across the globe," she murmured. "Besides, more people means more risk of leaks." Jonas gave a slow nod, conceding the point. "Understood. Then we do this with precision." He slid a burner phone across the table. "You'll need a fresh line. Your old one might be compromised by now. I'll keep scanning for any new intel on the location. The second you're on site, I can try to tap into local camera feeds or jam communications." Marina slipped the burner phone into her pocket. "Thank you." She hesitated, then exhaled. "I need to end him, Jonas. Not just to avenge Buck, but because he and his people will never stop until they get what they think I have. And I can't allow anyone else to be caught in their crossfire." Jonas studied her face. "Just promise me one thing. Get out if it becomes impossible. You've already paid too high a price." She didn't reply. In her heart, Marina knew that retreat no longer factored into the equation. She had lost too much, and letting Madeira walk away wasn't an option. By late afternoon, Marina was on the road, driving toward the compound Jonas had identified. She had spent a frantic hour packing gear into her car: rifle, sidearms, suppressors, extra ammunition, flashbangs, and a rudimentary med kit. The weight of the arsenal in her trunk felt reminiscent of the days she'd been deployed in clandestine operations. A wave of déjà vu mixed with sorrow washed over her. How did I end up here again? The 2-hour drive felt strangely peaceful, the roads carrying her past rolling farmland and patches of forest. Occasionally, she'd pass a small town with a family diner or a gas station, places that only highlighted the lonely path she was on. She couldn't help but wonder, had she ever truly escaped her past? Or had it merely been waiting for the right moment to drag her back in? Her eyes drifted to the passenger seat where a small bag of Buck's treats lay unopened. She had found it in the car earlier, and the sight of it nearly broke her. There would be no more lazy afternoons or joyful mornings. That gentle chapter was permanently closed. She clenched the steering wheel tighter, letting the anger motivate her rather than paralyze her. One last mission, she told herself. Finish Madeira, expose Regulus, and then I can decide what to do with the rest of my life. The road signs told her she was nearing her destination. She pulled off onto a smaller highway, then onto an unmarked service road. After a few more turns, she came upon a stretch of asphalt that ended abruptly at a rusted gate. She parked behind a thick clump of trees, killed the engine, and stepped out. The air smelled of damp earth and pine. She moved carefully through the underbrush, the leaves crunching underfoot. In the distance, she spotted the compound's chain-link fence. A quick check with her binoculars confirmed that the facility was indeed heavily guarded. 2 roving patrols, each composed of 3 men carrying rifles, circled the perimeter at methodical intervals. Floodlights perched on tall poles, scanning the open areas between the buildings. From what she could tell, the main warehouse was a large rectangular structure flanked by smaller outbuildings, likely offices or storage units. Marina hunkered down behind a fallen log, pulling out her phone to text Jonas. In position, perimeter checks out, heavy security. Within seconds, a response arrived. Acknowledged, intercepting minimal comm chatter, likely using short-range encrypted channels. Be cautious. She spent the next half hour observing the patterns. The patrols took approximately 10 minutes to complete a full circuit. Each time they left the southern edge of the fence, there was a window of maybe 2 minutes before they returned. She'd have to time her infiltration perfectly. The final piece of the puzzle was spotting a blind spot, an area the floodlights didn't consistently cover. She found it, a small gap near the compound's southwest corner where the angle of 2 lights overlapped poorly, leaving a narrow corridor of shadow. That's my entrance, she thought. She would have to slip through the fence, probably cut it, and dart to cover behind a dumpster or stack of wooden pallets. Her mind raced with possible contingencies. If she tripped a motion sensor, if a guard saw her, if Madeira's men were on higher alert than anticipated. She swallowed hard, no turning back. The sun slipped below the horizon as Marina watched the compound, the sky shifting from a late-day gold to the first hints of dusky purple. She waited until the patrols had circled one more time, then moved. Darting across the open ground with measured strides, she reached the fence. The steel links were cold against her fingertips, and she silently thanked years of training that let her cut through the metal with minimal noise. One section gave way, creating a small opening. She slid through like a ghost, careful not to snag her clothing or gear on the jagged edges. Heart pounding, she hunkered in the narrow corridor of darkness she had pinpointed earlier. A floodlight swept overhead, illuminating the fence a mere 2 yards to her right, but it didn't catch her position. When it moved on, she pressed it forward. Ahead, she spotted a row of stacked pallets, each holding large barrels that were probably used to store industrial chemicals or supplies. She ducked behind them, scanning the area. The southern wall of the compound loomed about 50 yards away, a yawning distance of exposed ground if she wasn't careful. A single guard stood by a side door, occasionally turning to glance behind him. Marina checked the small digital watch strapped to her wrist. She had about 1 minute before the patrol circled back into view. Perfect. She gripped her pistol, flicked off the safety, and slipped silently from her cover. Moving quickly yet quietly was second nature. A brief mental count. 1, 2, 3. The distance vanished under her steady pace. She reached the guard's blind spot just as he took a long drag from a cigarette, his attention on the empty yard. Without hesitation, she lunged. One hand clamped over the guard's mouth, the other pressed the pistol barrel into his temple with a muffled pfft from the suppressor. He went limp instantly, the cigarette flying from his lips. Marina caught him under the arms, lowering him carefully to the ground. The entire encounter lasted less than 5 seconds. Quickly, she checked the door. Locked. She patted the guard's pockets, finding a ring of keys, each labeled with small, colored stickers. She tried the first two unsuccessfully before the third slid in with a quiet click. Keeping her body tense, she cracked the door open an inch, ears straining for any noise from within. Hearing none, she slipped inside, dragging the guard's body in with her to avoid detection. She then let the door close silently behind her. The air inside was stale, tinged with oil and metal, likely a maintenance corridor leading deeper into the facility. She crouched, heart still hammering, adjusting her eyes to the dim overhead lighting. This was it. She was inside Madera's fortress. And somewhere within these walls, she hoped to find the man himself and finally put an end to the nightmare he'd unleashed on her life. The maintenance corridor extended about 50 feet, lined with old electrical panels and cluttered with empty cardboard boxes. Marina advanced in a low crouch, pistol raised, ears alert for even the smallest echo of footsteps. A single fluorescent bulb flickered overhead, casting jittery shadows on the concrete floor. She stepped around a stack of cleaning supplies, pausing at a corner to listen. Voices drifted from further inside the building. She couldn't make out the words, but the cadence suggested at least two people engaged in casual conversation. Easing her head forward, she peeked around the corner. Ahead lay a larger, open area with a high ceiling, illuminated by multiple industrial lamps. At least half a dozen men stood near crates stacked in neat rows, all wearing tactical gear. She immediately recognized them as Madera's paramilitary enforcers. A forklift idled nearby, and she could see a few more armed guards patrolling catwalks above. The entire setup reminded her of a covert arms-dealing hub. So that's what this place is, she thought grimly. They likely stored and distributed illegal weapons, contraband, and anything else Madera's clients paid for. She also noticed a makeshift office area in the corner, a cluster of desks laden with the laptops, maps pinned to a wall behind them. Her heart kicked up a notch. If those laptops contained any record of Madera's business, or better yet, some tie to the elusive Regulus, that could be crucial evidence. But the desks were out in the open, in full view of multiple guards. A direct dash would be suicide. Marina tapped a quick message to Jonas on the burner phone. Inside. 6+ tangos in the main area, more on catwalks. Advice? While waiting for a response, she scanned the rest of the space. A secondary corridor branched off to the left, presumably leading further into the compound. Another door, slightly ajar, was situated beyond the forklift. If Madera was anywhere, it might be deeper within, likely a secure room or office. She was about to check her phone again when it buzzed. Try for higher vantage. I can't jam them without alerting the rest. Also picking up an urgent message on their comms about a shipment departing soon. Marina pursed her lips. A vantage point. The catwalks. But those had men patrolling. She spotted a ladder near the forklift that led to a raised walkway overhead. If she could slip up there, perhaps she'd find a route to the other side, or at least gain a line of sight on the open floor below. Timing her movements with the forklift's engine revving, she darted from her hiding spot. In a few agile steps, she reached the ladder. Her stomach lurched as she climbed. One misstep or one unlucky glance from below would expose her. The metal rungs vibrated under her weight, but the noise of the forklift helped mask any rattles. At the top, she found herself on a narrow walkway made of steel grating. She ducked immediately, flattening herself against the railing. 10 feet away, a guard in black tactical attire stood with his back turned, scanning the lower floor. He had no idea she was there. Marina inched forward, careful not to let her gear clank. She gripped her pistol, weighing the pros and cons of a silent takedown. If he toppled off the catwalk, it would cause a commotion. If she choked him out, she risked a struggle that might alert others. She decided on a clean shot, a single suppressed round to a critical area. Taking careful aim, she squeezed the trigger. The soft hiss of the suppressor was almost imperceptible over the warehouse's noise. The guard jolted. A small hole punched through the back of his helmet. He collapsed onto the catwalk with a dull thud. Marina rushed forward to catch him, holding him steady so he didn't roll off the edge. The entire incident took less than 3 seconds, and it appeared no one below had noticed. With the guard neutralized, she dragged his body into a dark corner of the walkway, pressing him against the railing where he'd be less visible. She quickly patted down his vest, finding a radio with an earpiece and a few extra magazines. She pocketed the extra ammo and carefully placed the earpiece in her own ear. At first, she heard only static. Then a crackled voice. Unit 4, status check. Catwalk watch, report. Marina's heart pounded. This was exactly the risk she'd worried about. A routine check-in. She mimicked the guard's likely tone as best she could, pressing the radio button. Unit 4, all clear. A pause crackled. Confirmed, next sweep in 15. She breathed a sigh of relief, mentally marking the time. She had 15 minutes before the next check, maybe less if something else triggered suspicion. Shifting her focus back to the walkway, she moved slowly along its length, mindful that any open vantage might also expose her. Below, the men continued loading crates. She spotted no sign of Madera himself. At the far end of the catwalk, a set of stairs descended to another corridor. She crouched at the top step, peering down. To her surprise, this corridor was better lit and looked more polished than the rest of the warehouse. The walls were painted a neutral gray, and the floor was lined with some sort of rubberized covering. An administrative area? She listened intently but heard only faint voices from behind a closed door partway down the hall. A small sign beside it read, Operations. Her pulse jumped. If Madera was here, that was the logical place for him to be. Glancing at her watch, she noted she had used up about 3 minutes since the last radio check. She needed to be quick. Descending the stairs in a crouch, she paused at the bottom, pressing an ear to the door. Voices inside were too muffled to distinguish. She tested the handle. Locked. She could attempt a quick breach, but that would likely alert everyone on the other side. Instead, she pulled out a small tool, a mini scope that she could slide under the door. The angle was tricky, but she managed to glimpse part of the room. A table with a large map pinned above it, a few men with rifles standing guard, and, yes, him. A tall man with precisely trimmed hair, wearing a tactical jacket over a collared shirt. He pointed at the map, occasionally stabbing it with a gloved finger. His posture radiated the same commanding energy she'd seen at Dock 17. Lucius Madera. Adrenaline surged through Marina. This was her chance to confront the man who had ordered the attack on her cafe and orchestrated the brutal wounding, now the killing, of Buck. But storming that room with multiple guards present was near suicidal. She needed a strategy, something that would isolate Madera or at least thin out his defenses. She withdrew the scope and let her thoughts race. If she tossed a flashbang, she might stun them all, but the noise would undoubtedly alert the entire compound. If she quietly eliminated the guards one by one, Madera might slip out another exit. She considered luring some away, but that also carried risks. Maybe Jonas can help. She tapped a quick message on the phone. Found Madera in ops room after guards. Need distraction or infiltration plan. Within moments, Jonas replied, I can trip an alarm at the north side of the facility. Should draw some men away. You'll have a brief window. Marina's lips curled into a grim approximation of a smile. Do it when I say. Stand by. She stuffed the phone back into her pocket, double-checking her equipment. She had 2 flashbangs and 1 smoke grenade. Perfect for a short burst of chaos. Her plan formed quickly. Jonas triggers an alarm on the opposite side, pulling guards out. Then she uses a flashbang to disorient whoever remains, focusing on Madera. She braced herself, stepping back from the door, pressing against the corridor wall. Now, she typed to Jonas. A tense half-minute passed. Then, distant klaxons blared from somewhere on the northern perimeter. Almost immediately, she heard a voice inside the operations room bark, We have a breach on the north fence. Half of you go. Feet stomped across the room. The door flew open as 2 men rushed out, leaving presumably fewer guards behind. Marina flattened herself, letting the men race past, too focused on the alarm to glance her way. She exhaled, feeling her heart drumming. 3 seconds later, she heard Madera's voice from inside, sharper now. Find out who triggered it. Lock this place down if you have to. Move. Another pair of footsteps receded. That left, at best, Madera and maybe 1 or 2 guards. Marina pulled the pin on a flashbang, gently easing the door open. She lobbed it in. A startled shout rang out, followed by the telltale pop, flash of the device. Blinding light and a concussive wave spilled into the corridor. She slipped in right after, adrenaline coursing. Inside, she found three men reeling from the flashbang. One was Madeira, clutching the table as he blinked furiously. Another man was half collapsed against the wall, weapon raised but aimless. Marina wasted no time. Two quick, suppressed shots to the armed guard's torso. He dropped, groaning. Madeira, blinking tears from his eyes, fumbled for a sidearm. Marina moved like a striking viper, crossing the distance in a heartbeat. She kicked the gun from his hand, sending it clattering across the floor. "Your men killed my dog," she snarled, leveling her own pistol at his chest. She wanted him to see the fury in her gaze, wanted him to understand that this moment was not random or accidental. It was vengeance. Madeira blinked again, recognition dawning. "You Kraus," he gasped, voice raw from the flashbang's shock. Marina's chest felt tight, anger and sorrow swirling into a lethal combination. She pressed the pistol barrel firmly against Madeira's sternum. "Tell me what you were after. Why did you come for me?" Her voice wavered only slightly, but the rage behind it was unmistakable. Madeira, still half blinded, lifted one hand in a pacifying gesture. Blood trickled from his ear, likely from the flashbang. Wait, you don't understand." She pressed harder, her own breathing ragged. "I understand you butchered my companion for something you think I had. Tell me what it is, or so help me." He coughed, eyes narrowing as he tried to focus on her face. "We wanted the package, the Regulus intel, information on covert deals, assassinations, everything they kept in encrypted files." Her pulse kicked. Regulus. It was the name Jonius had discovered, the name that kept haunting her every lead. "Why would you think I had it?" "You were ex-Special Forces, tied to Black Ops. Word in certain circles says you had dirt on multiple high-level deals. Maybe you didn't even know what you had, but..." He coughed again, a desperate laugh escaping him. "We got a tip that the ex-sniper who opened a cafe was sitting on a goldmine of intel. My men were supposed to retrieve it quietly." "Quietly?" Her voice caught in her throat as she remembered Buck's final moments. She wanted to pull the trigger. Fury like she'd never felt before coursed through her veins. Madeira seemed to sense that edge, that lethal intent. He raised both hands, palms outward. "The dog wasn't my order. My men panicked. They made a mistake. I'm sorry, but you gotta listen. Regulus is bigger than me, bigger than anything you can imagine. They're the real threat. I was just following orders." Marina's finger tightened on the trigger. "That excuse won't bring him back." "Nothing will," Madeira said, trembling. "But if you kill me, Regulus will come for you with everything they have got. You think you're safe now? You won't last a day once they realize you have the location of their dirty laundry." She hesitated. Was he implying that she actually had some hidden data? Something from her old missions? It sounded impossible. She had walked away from that life with nothing but minimal personal documents. Unless... A stray memory tugged at her. She recalled an old storage unit near her final base, a place she'd never returned to, but might have left behind hard drives or classified reports she'd once been tasked to deliver. Could that be it? Behind her, the guard she had shot groaned, stirring. She pivoted, firing another round to ensure he stayed down. Then she turned back to Madeira, who seized the moment to reach for a second pistol concealed at his ankle. He raised it, too slow. She fired first, striking him in the shoulder. He howled in pain, dropping the weapon. Blood stained his jacket. She advanced, eyes cold. "Where is Regulus?" His breath came in ragged gasps. "There, everywhere. Corporate fronts, military contracts. You kill me, you'll have a target on your back the size of a city block." Marina stared at him, the urge to finish him right there overshadowed by one nagging thought. If he dies, I lose my only direct link to Regulus. Madeira slumped against the table, blood trickling down his forearm and pooling on the floor. Though wounded, his eyes burned with defiance, or perhaps desperation. Marina exhaled in a trembling burst, torn between delivering final justice for Buck and extracting the information she needed to confront the real puppet masters. "Talk," she ordered, forcing the muzzle of her pistol under his chin. "Where is Regulus based? Who runs it?" He grimaced, sweat beading on his brow. "I only have a name, Valkyr Division. It's a clandestine group rumored to be at the top. They operate under the code name Regulus. They have eyes in law enforcement, private security, maybe even the government. Before she could press him further, footsteps pounded in the corridor outside. The alarm Jonas triggered must have been investigated and dismissed, and now they were converging back toward the ops room. Marina's time was up. She glared at Madeira. Do I kill him or keep him alive for interrogation? She weighed the risks. If she shot him now, she'd have the satisfaction of ending one monster's life, but she might lose track of any leads connecting him to Regulus. On the other hand, trying to take him prisoner was a logistical nightmare, especially alone. A stray bullet whizzed past, lodging in the wall behind her. One of Madeira's returning guards had peeked through the door. Instinct had kicked in. She yanked Madeira against her, using him as a partial shield as she fired back, forcing the guard to retreat. You'll never make it out alive, Madeira gasped, the pain evident in his voice. I've done the impossible before, she spat, tugging him with her. If she kept him close, maybe his men wouldn't risk shooting. She moved toward the corridor, only to see two more guards appearing at the far end, rifles raised. She ducked behind the doorframe, cursing under her breath. Another option formed in her mind, the narrow corridor leading back to the catwalk area. She had just come from there, meaning it might not be as heavily guarded. But dragging a bleeding hostage made her a slow target. Glancing back at Madeira, she noticed his face was ashen, eyes fluttering. He was losing blood fast. He won't last long, she realized. If he bleeds out, I gain nothing. She made a split-second decision. Toss him aside or try to keep him alive. She slammed the butt of her pistol into his temple, rendering him unconscious. Then she grabbed the nearest roll of duct tape from the cluttered table, likely used for securing crates, and bound his hands. She also pressed a wad of gauze onto his shoulder wound, applying just enough pressure to prevent immediate death. I need him to talk when this is over. Gunfire erupted again from the doorway. Marina ducked, returning fire. She had a single smoke grenade left. Time to go. Marina lobbed the smoke grenade into the hallway, the canister bouncing along the floor before releasing a thick plume of gray-white fog. Shouts of confusion echoed as the guards tried to orient themselves. Taking advantage of the chaos, Marina hoisted Madeira's unconscious form over her shoulder with a grunt. He was heavier than he looked, and his dead weight threatened to unbalance her. Bullets zip-panned past, some striking the walls with dull thuds. She pressed forward into the smoke, staying low, her free hand gripping her sidearm. Every muscle burned from the awkward weight of Madeira, but rage and adrenaline carried her onward. She could hardly see more than a foot in front of her. The corridor lights glowed faintly through the fog, creating a surreal, ghostly effect. One guard materialized in front of her like a phantom. She squeezed the trigger twice. He crumpled. Another silhouette emerged, firing wildly. A bullet grazed her left arm, sending a hot spike of pain. She bit back a cry, returning a shot that found the attacker's leg. He yowled in agony, hitting the ground. Marina stumbled through, eventually reaching the catwalk stairs. Her lungs burned from inhaling some of the smoke. She set Madeira down briefly, wincing at the sting in her arm. Blood trickled from the graze, staining her jacket. She had to move. The smoke wouldn't last forever. Clenching her teeth, she slung Madeira back over her shoulder and climbed the metal steps in a half-run, half-lurch. Every step felt like an eternity. The catwalk itself was now a battlefield of swirling smoke below, but above the haze, the air was clearer. She risked a quick glance downward, guards rushing in confusion, some heading to the ops room, others trying to find vantage points. Good, they were disorganized. Her next goal? The ladder she'd used to reach this walkway. She needed to get out before the entire complex locked down again. She hurried along the catwalk, praying that no one was waiting at the top. The corridor lights flickered from the still blaring alarm. Jonas must still be messing with their systems, she thought. Reaching the ladder, she carefully maneuvered Madeira's body onto her back, hooking an arm under his knees to keep him steady. Descending was trickier than climbing. She slung her pistol in its holster, using both hands on the rungs while pressing Madeira's weight against her. Halfway down, a jolt of gunfire from below nearly made her lose her grip. She clung to the ladder, boots slipping for a heart-stopping second, then continued. At the bottom, she ducked behind a row of crates. She had to cross that wide-open floor again, a space now crawling with guards. Another wave of gunfire rattled the crates and splinters flew. She recognized a better path. If she cut left, she could reach the corridor that would lead her back outside. The side door she'd come in through was likely compromised by now. She signaled Jonas via text, exiting West Corridor. Need a vehicle at my location if possible. His response was quick. I'm not on site, but I can shut off perimeter floodlights for 30 seconds. That might give you cover. Do it, she whispered, bracing herself for the final sprint. Overhead, the alarm lights strobed. She took a steadying breath, mustering her last reserves of strength to carry this half-conscious, bleeding man, her ticket to unraveling Regulus. Marina Krause's pulse hammered in her ears as she crouched behind a tall stack of crates, attempting to redistribute Lucius Madera's weight across her shoulder. He was barely conscious, blood matting his clothing, but still too critical to leave behind. Through the earpiece Jonas had provided, she could hear the continuing wail of alarms and the frantic shouts of Madera's men as they scrambled to contain a breach they didn't fully understand. She whispered into the burner phone, "Now, Jonas, kill the lights." Within seconds, the compound's perimeter lamps blinked out, plunging the outer areas into darkness. A few emergency spotlights still swept across the facility, but the edges were significantly darker, offering a potential escape route. Time was short, though. The moment the guards realized the lights had been deliberately cut, they would flood the yard with flashlights and intensify their search. Marina swallowed hard, pushing away the throbbing pain in her arm where a bullet had grazed her. Gritting her teeth, she pressed on. Clutching her pistol, she scooted closer to the edge of the crates and peered around. The forklift stood idle, its headlights off, casting no helpful glow. She saw silhouettes of guards crossing the floor, their rifles scanning the gloom. One man barked orders, "Sweep the south exit, don't let them slip away." She guessed they were referencing the corridor she had initially used to enter. Good, they still assumed she might try to backtrack that way. With a slight hitch in her breath, Marina hoisted Madera up again. She bit her lip to stifle a groan. Her muscles were screaming. Once more, she reminded herself that this was her only chance to get the intel she needed. Intel that could stop Regulus from sending 100 more killers to her doorstep. She edged along the pallets, making sure her silhouette blended with the stacked supplies. Every time a flicker of light swept by, she froze, shielding Madera's body from direct view. When she finally reached the western corridor, she found the door propped open. Two of Madera's men had apparently forced it during some earlier scuffle. Marina slipped inside. Instead of the wide, exposed yard, she now navigated a narrower hallway that connected the main warehouse to an adjacent building. The corridor was empty for the moment, so she seized it. Step by step, she plodded forward, chest tightening whenever she heard muffled gunshots or shouts in the distance. Stay calm, stay focused. A forklift engine revved somewhere else in the warehouse, accompanied by the sound of heavy crates being shifted. Perhaps Madera's men were trying to secure their contraband, worried that this whole fiasco was part of a larger raid. Marina used the distraction to her advantage, reaching a heavy metal door at the far end of the corridor. She gingerly set Madera down against the wall. He moaned, eyelids fluttering. A rivulet of blood ran down his neck, staining his collar. She checked his pulse, still there, though weak and unsteady. "We're almost out," she muttered. She tried the door handle. Locked. Of course. She glanced over her shoulder, half expecting the squad of heavily armed guards to burst in any second. Fishing through Madera's pockets, she located a set of keys, likely the master set for the compound. Her hands trembled as she hurried to test each key, the metallic jingle echoing in her ears. Come on, she thought. Finally, one slid into place, and the lock clicked. She helped Madera to his feet again, opening the door and praying that whatever lay beyond was less perilous than what she was leaving behind. The door led to an adjacent warehouse, a smaller, dimly lit structure filled with steel drums and stacks of wooden pallets. The air smelled of chemicals and motor oil, making Marina's nostrils flare. She tugged Madera along, scanning every corner for movement. Overhead, half a dozen hanging lamps provided patchy illumination. No immediate sign of guards, but she couldn't let her guard down. Madera coughed, his eyes rolling as he tried to stay conscious. You won't make it, he wheezed, though the bravado had drained from his voice. The bullet wound in his shoulder still bled sluggishly, seeping through the hasty bandage. "Shut up!" Marina snapped, voice taut. She paused near a row of metal shelving units, carefully lowering him against the wall. She had to reassess her route. The compound's main entrance was likely crawling with armed men. The perimeter fences might offer a safer bet, but that still required crossing open ground. Her phone buzzed. Jonas's text. Limited time. Perimeter lights will reboot soon. Surplus generator kicking in. Get out fast. She closed her eyes briefly. No time for caution. She eyed a set of large rolling doors at the far end of the warehouse. With luck, they opened to a loading dock that might be less guarded. Of course, less guarded was a guess at best. She cast a final glance at Madeira. Despite her hatred for the man, she couldn't ignore the fact that he was a literal key to unraveling Regulus. She slid her arms around his torso and hoisted him up again, ignoring her own injured arm's protest. They made slow progress. Each step was a jolt of agony. She began to fear she might collapse before they got anywhere safe. Then, out of the corner of her eye, she caught a flicker of movement. She froze, pressing Madeira against a stack of crates for partial cover. A guard stepped into view from behind a steel drum. He was alone, gun at the ready, eyes scanning the floor. Marina gritted her teeth. If she tried sneaking past with Madeira, the guard would almost certainly notice them. She couldn't afford a firefight. Gunshots would draw more attention. Glancing around, she spotted a metal pipe on a nearby shelf. With careful precision, she grabbed it. Timing her steps with the guard's momentary glance in another direction, she advanced. The guard whirled, mouth opening in surprise. But too late. Marina swung the pipe in a short, brutal arc, cracking against his temple. He collapsed without a sound. She eased his body behind some barrels, quickly checking to ensure he was still alive. He was out cold, but breathing. Better than he deserves, she thought, remembering Buck's fate. Madeira let out a ragged laugh. "I hired good men," he muttered, voice thick with sarcasm. "They never stood a chance against you." Marina ignored the comment, tightening her grip on him. She now had a short distance to the rolling doors. The first was locked from the inside. She tested the second one, relieved to find it unlatched. With a grunt, she shouldered it open. A rush of cool night air hit her face. The yard beyond was only partially lit, thanks to Jonas's sabotage. But she could hear engines and shouting not far off. 3 quick gunshots cracked through the air. Somewhere else in the compound, likely guards reacting to phantom threats. Marina clenched her jaw, mustering the last of her energy. She led Madeira out, pressing close to the warehouse wall, ready to make a final sprint for the fence. The yard stretched out before them, scattered with debris and half-loaded crates. Dim emergency lamps cast an anemic glow, revealing the tall, chain-link fence in the distance. Marina felt her chest tighten. A minute, maybe 2, before the backup generators fully restored the floodlights. After that, the entire compound would be illuminated like a stage. Madeira's weight dragged at her. He stumbled, nearly bringing them both down, and she gripped his jacket to keep him upright. "Keep moving," she hissed, though she doubted he had much control left. His blood loss was alarming, and she was far from a medic. They navigated a circuitous path behind stacks of wooden pallets, inching their way toward the fence. Once or twice, distant silhouettes appeared at the edge of her vision, but no one seemed to notice them. They must be focusing on the main building, she thought. Good. She finally spotted the fence line just a few yards away. She knew from memory that if she moved roughly 30 feet along it, she'd find a section she could cut or force open. A fresh wave of panic seized her when an overhead spotlight flickered, then died. Jonas's sabotage was still in effect, but it wouldn't last. Gathering her resolve, Marina half lifted, half pushed Madeira into motion again. They reached the fence and she fumbled for her wire cutters. Her hands shook, slick with sweat and a bit of her own blood. The sound of metal snipping seemed deafening in the tense silence. Inch by inch, she carved out a crude opening, glancing over her shoulder the entire time. At last, she wrenched the mesh aside, widening a gap enough for them to slip through. Madeira groaned as she shoved him forward, then followed. The second they were on the other side, she supported his weight and dragged him into a cluster of overgrown shrubs. Her heart hammered so loudly she feared it might give them away. With trembling fingers, she tapped out a message to Jonas. "Outside, need pickup?" A moment later, his reply. Coordinates. I'm inbound in a stolen van. 2 minutes. Relief flooded her. 2 minutes. She could hold out for that. She pressed Madera's back against a tree trunk, letting him slump while she scanned the perimeter. In the distance, she saw vehicle headlights flickering along the main road. That had to be Jonas. Sure enough, a battered white cargo van appeared, swerving onto the shoulder near the clump of trees. The passenger door slid open. Jonas leaned out, one hand on the wheel. Hurry, he shouted. Marina seized Madera under the arms, practically hauling him through the undergrowth. Her wounded arm screamed in protest, but she ignored it. The faint roars of alarm from the compound were growing louder. Any moment, searchlights might sweep this area. They reached the van. Jonas hopped out to help, grabbing Madera's legs as Marina supported his torso. Together, they shoved him inside. Marina scrambled in after him, collapsing onto the metal floor. Jonas slammed the door shut, jumped back into the driver's seat, and floored the accelerator. The van careened onto the empty highway, tires squealing. Marina felt every bump jarring her already bruised body. She glanced at Madera, lying next to her with a dazed expression. His lips were parted, blood staining them. For a second, she considered letting him bleed out. He deserved nothing less for all he'd done. But the thought of Buck's final moments reminded her there was a bigger monster behind the scenes. Regulus, don't die on me yet, you bastard, she thought grimly. I still need you. Jonas steered the van with white-knuckled focus, his eyes flicking nervously to the rearview mirror. The road behind them remained dark. No immediate sign of pursuit. The stolen vehicle rattled at high speed, adding to the tension. Inside, Marina did what little she could to stabilize Madera's bleeding. She tore strips from a spare shirt and pressed them against his shoulder wound, tying them as a makeshift bandage. His skin felt clammy, his pulse erratic. From the driver's seat, Jonas asked, We're clear for now, but not for long. Where to? Marina winced, pressing down on the bandage until Madera hissed in pain. We need a safe place with medical supplies and privacy. I have some gear stashed at an old cabin near the river. It's about 40 miles east. You know the place? He nodded, vaguely, the one you used to talk about retiring to before you decided on the cafe. Yeah, she confirmed quietly. Retirement. The word felt hollow now, a relic of a dream she'd lost in a hail of bullets and betrayal. Let's go there. Jonas didn't argue. He pressed harder on the wow. The engine whining, Marina gazed at Madera's unconscious face in the flickering light from the passing street lamps. His breath rasped, but for now, he lived. She wanted answers, and she wanted them soon. During the drive, she tried to contact her old friend at the veterinary clinic, more out of reflex than logic. Buck was gone. It made her chest ache just thinking about it, but some part of her mind kept replaying the motions of calling the clinic for updates. The phone line, however, rang empty. She remembered then, there's no one to speak to now. The cabin had once been her emergency hideout, a place off any official grid. She had set it up with a stockpile of rations, medical kits, and even a small generator. It wasn't exactly luxurious, but it would suit their needs. As Jonas navigated back roads and dusty lanes, Marina's gaze drifted out the window, seeing only her own distorted reflection. How many more lines do I have to cross before this ends? By the time they reached the cabin, dawn was just beginning to stain the horizon pink and gold. Jonas parked beneath the sweeping boughs of an old oak tree, cutting the engine. The area was secluded, surrounded by tall grass and a thick line of pines. The cabin itself looked like it had been neglected, wooden steps worn down, windows caked with dust. Marina climbed out, scanning the perimeter with a practiced eye. No footprints, no tire tracks aside from their own. Safe enough, at least for now. Jonas carried Madera's feet while Marina took his shoulders, hauling him up the creaking porch steps. She fumbled with a hidden key beneath a loose plank, then unlocked the door. The cabin's stale interior air greeted them. The place looked exactly as she'd left it, a bare-bones living area, a tiny kitchenette, and a hallway leading to 2 small bedrooms. Put him on the sofa, Marina instructed. Jonas complied, dropping Madera's legs with a grunt. The unconscious man groaned once, then lay still. Marina hurried to open the curtains halfway, letting in just enough dawn light to see without turning on any lamps that might attract attention. She then moved to a small closet where she had stored an old footlocker. She flipped open the metal latches and lifted the lid, revealing a modest collection of medical supplies: gauze, bandages, antiseptics, sutures, painkillers. There was also a half-empty IV bag and some saline solution, leftovers from her paramedic training sessions ages ago. She grabbed what she needed and set to work on Madeira. The bullet had torn through muscle and possibly nicked bone. Given his blood loss, there was no telling how much internal damage had been done. She wasn't a surgeon, but she could at least clean the wound and stitch it enough to keep him alive. Jonas hovered nearby, biting his lip as he watched her with anxious eyes. "Should we call a doctor?" he asked, voice tight. Marina shook her head. "No, that'd leave a paper trail. We just need him stable enough to talk." She pressed a fresh gauze pad on the wound, ignoring Madeira's pain twitch. "You could help by boiling water in the kitchen. Stove's propane, so it should still work." Jonas nodded and disappeared down the hallway, footsteps echoing in the quiet space. Marina focused on her makeshift operation. Madeira stirred, half-conscious. His eyes fluttered open, clouded with pain. He gritted his teeth but didn't scream, either from sheer willpower or numbness. "Cooperate," she said softly, "and maybe you'll live." He managed to croak a reply. "Cooperate? How?" She didn't answer immediately, concentrating instead on threading a suture needle. Once the water was ready, Jonas brought it in, and Marina sterilized what she could. She worked quickly, biting her own lip when her injured arm throbbed in protest. The stitches were clumsy but functional. She bandaged the wound, then rigged the IV bag to a nearby coat rack. Once finished, she leaned back on her haunches, wiping sweat from her brow. Madeira's breath remained shallow but less ragged. He glared at her with one eye half open. You think Regulus will let you keep me alive? They'll burn this place to the ground." Marina set the supplies aside, rummaging for a roll of duct tape in the footlocker. She bound Madeira's wrist to the sofa arm, making sure he couldn't lash out in a desperate moment. The entire time he kept smirking as though he still held some unseen trump card. Only when she finished did she finally address him. "You're going to give me details, who Regulus is, where they operate, and why they think I have something they want." She leaned in close, eyes blazing. "Because if you don't, I'll make sure your last few hours on Earth are hell." Jonas cleared his throat behind her. "Maybe we should try a different approach," he murmured. "He might respond better to logic than threats." Marina shot Jonas a fierce look. "He led the men who killed Buck. We do it my way." Silence fell over the cabin as the gravity of that statement settled. Jonas sighed, taking a step back. "I get it," he said softly. "I just don't want you to lose yourself in this." Marina ignored him, turning her attention fully to Madeira. "Now talk." Marina's heart pounded as she signaled Jonas to kill the lights. He moved swiftly, drawing the threadbare curtains shut while Marina reached for her sidearm. The cabin's interior plunged into dim shadows, made lighter only by the pale glow of dawn slipping through cracks in the curtains. She crouched by a window, inching aside a corner of fabric to peer outside. A black SUV rumbled up the overgrown dirt path leading to the cabin. Its headlights were off, which told her immediately that whoever was inside didn't want to attract attention. Marina's pulse spiked. Had Madeira's people traced them? Or worse yet, had Regulus discovered her hideout? She exchanged a quick look with Jonas, who wore the same worried expression. Madeira, still bound and barely coherent, tried to crane his neck toward the window. "My men," he muttered, though his tone held more fear than hope. Outside, the SUV rolled to a stop some 20 yards away. The driver's door opened, and a single figure stepped out. A tall, slender build, clad in dark clothing, possibly tactical gear. The person moved with practiced caution, scanning the surroundings. Marina couldn't see a weapon, but that didn't mean there wasn't one concealed. The figure proceeded slowly around the SUV, apparently checking the perimeter for any sign of activity. Jonas squatted beside Marina, whispering, "We can't handle a firefight, not with him wounded and you injured." She nodded, gritting her teeth. She weighed her options. If she and Jonas ambushed this individual, they might tip off more potential attackers. If they tried to sneak away, the noise of Madeira's moaning or the squeaky cabin floor could reveal them. Another idea formed in her head. Maybe she could lure the visitor closer, see what they wanted. If it was a single person, They might not be looking for trouble. Madeira coughed, wincing from the pain. Could be your friend, he muttered, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Marina glared at him, then returned her gaze to the window. The figure now stood near the porch step, evidently debating whether to approach the front door or circle around. Their posture was tense, as if anticipating a hostile welcome. Stay low, Marina told Jonas. She eased quietly toward the front door, gun raised in a two-handed grip. Her injured arm throbbed, but she pushed aside the discomfort. The old cabin's floor creaked under her weight, and she cursed inwardly at the noise. She flicked the safety off her pistol, bracing herself for whatever came next. A soft knock rattled the door, followed by a voice. Hello, anyone in there? The voice was unexpectedly feminine, with a calm steadiness. I'm not armed, she continued, and I'm alone. I'm looking for Marina Kraus. Marina exchanged a shocked glance with Jonas. How does she know my name? She pressed herself against the wall beside the door, silent, trying to decide whether to respond. Outside, the woman knocked again, more firmly this time. It's important. I have information regarding Regulus. Marina's mind raced. Regulus? Here at her doorstep? The woman outside claimed to have information. It could be a trap, yet curiosity and desperation tugged at her. Any lead on Regulus might be crucial, especially given what Madeira had just told them about Blackleaf. Cautiously, she signaled Jonas to keep an eye on Madeira. Then, after a tense moment of deliberation, she reached for the doorknob. Who are you? She asked through the closed door, keeping her pistol ready. I go by Sasha, came the reply. I'm an old associate of yours. Marina frowned. She didn't recall the name, or at least it didn't ring a bell from her old operations. Could be an alias, she reasoned. She pulled the door open a crack, enough to peek through. On the porch stood a woman in her late 20s or early 30s, wearing dark cargo pants and a windbreaker. She held her hands up, palms out, to show she carried no visible weapon. I know you have reason not to trust me, Sasha said quietly, eyes scanning Marina's face. But I promise I'm alone. I came because I heard about Madeira's operation at the warehouse. I suspected you might be involved. You were always a ghost, figured you'd try a remote hideout. Marina kept her pistol leveled, though she opened the door a bit wider. How do you know my name and that I'd be here? Sasha let out a slow breath. Let's just say I was involved in the Black Leaf mission too, though not on the same team. I handled some of the intelligence analysis. I recognized your signature on certain field reports. The mention of Black Leaf spiked Marina's blood pressure. Madeira had insisted that those mission files were the key to Regulus's interest in her. Prove it, Marina said, her voice cold. Sasha reached into the pocket of her windbreaker, moving slowly. She withdrew a folded piece of paper and held it out. This is a decrypted snippet from the Black Leaf logs, featuring your old call sign Specker. Also have the rest on a secure drive. I came to warn you, Regulus is closing in. They believe you have the full data set. Marina snatched the paper, scanning the text by the faint dawn light. There it was, her call sign, along with references to a classified infiltration in Eastern Europe. While the snippet was incomplete, the details matched what little she remembered. Her stomach twisted. This newcomer was either telling the truth or a very skilled forger. Behind her, Jonas called out from inside the cabin. Everything okay? Marina considered her next move. Sasha was unarmed, at least visibly, and claiming to be an ally, yet the stakes were too high for blind trust. Glancing over Sasha's shoulder, she saw the black SUV. It was empty, no obvious sign of backup. She took a step back and waved Sasha inside, guns still trained on her. All right, come in slowly. Any sudden moves, I shoot. Sasha nodded, stepping over the threshold with measured caution. Marina closed the door behind them, securing the lock. Jonas stood in the middle of the room, looking tense, while Madeira lay bound on the sofa, watching the scene with grim interest. Who's that? Sasha asked, nodding at Madeira's bandaged figure. Marina's expression darkened. A piece of the puzzle. Sasha's eyes flicked from Madeira to Jonas, then settled on Marina. I see. So you've already started unraveling the Regulus connections. She let out a low whistle. Didn't think you'd move so fast. Marina snorted. I didn't have much choice. They broke into my cafe and murdered my dog. Madeira's men. She jerked her chin toward the wounded man on the sofa, whose lips parted in a sneer. We pulled him out of his compound. Sasha's expression softened for a split second, genuine sympathy flashing in her eyes. I'm sorry, truly. Regulus doesn't value innocent life. She shifted her stance. Look, I know you don't trust me, but if you want to understand why they think you have black leaf data, I can fill in some gaps. Marina nodded, crossing her arms. Jonas pulled a chair to the center of the room, motioning Sasha to sit. Meanwhile, Marina remained standing, pistol at her side. Start talking. Sasha settled into the chair, sighing. Blackleaf wasn't just an infiltration mission. It was part of a larger chain of covert ops. Everyone involved was told to compartmentalize. You probably only knew your small piece. She paused, checking Marina's reaction. Well, the overarching objective was to gather evidence on corrupt intelligence officials who were funneling weapons to off-the-books paramilitary groups. High-level people, some within our own government. Regulus was orchestrating those deals. Marina's gut tightened. She had known that mission was bigger than standard Black Ops, but she'd never guessed it went that high. So we were collecting evidence on Regulus? Exactly, Sasha confirmed. We uncovered massive troves of data, money laundering logs, communications, even lists of hits they ordered. But once the mission ended, the official stance was that all evidence got destroyed or locked away. The few of us who tried to expose it were threatened or coerced into silence. Jonas chimed in, brow furrowed. So you think some piece of that evidence ended up with Marina by accident? Sasha nodded. Records show you extracted a final set of files from a compromised lab. The assumption was that you handed it all over, but apparently Regulus fears you might have retained a copy, maybe stashed it somewhere, either intentionally or by mistake. Marina exhaled, memories flooding back. She remembered running through a smoky corridor, server drives slung over her shoulder. The mission had been chaotic, her focus solely on surviving the extraction zone. She'd never even learned what was on those drives. I recall handing everything to my commander, but if some part was mislabeled or if I made a secondary backup, she trailed off, the weight of possibility settling over her. Regulus thinks I have it. That's why Madeira was sent, Sasha said, glancing at him. And if they don't hear from him soon, they'll send more, possibly a full strike team. Marina felt a swell of dread. Then we need to find that data before they do. Otherwise, I'll be hunted until the end of time. Sasha leaned forward. I can help. I know how to interpret the partial logs. If we locate that data, we can expose Regulus on our terms, release everything publicly. But it means we have to get ahead of them. Madeira, silent until now, let out a low, derisive laugh. You think some old Black Ops files will take down Regulus? They have connections in every power structure. They'll bury your story or label it misinformation. You'll be the ones disappearing. Marina regarded him with smoldering animosity. Better to try and fail than live under their boot. She found it difficult to keep her voice steady, remembering Buck's final moments. If there's even a chance we can cripple them, I'm taking it. She turned her attention back to Sasha. So how do we track this theoretical stash of data? I don't remember leaving anything behind. Sasha pursed her lips. We'd have to systematically check each place you stayed after Blackleaf. Storage units, safe deposit boxes, old contacts. We'd also want to see if your name appears in any overshadow logs that mention leftover drives. She paused as though bracing for bad news. But time is short. Regulus probably has their own leads. Once they realize Madeira's out of the picture, they'll escalate. Jonas stepped toward the table, grabbing a notepad. Let's start listing possible locations. Marina, walk us through your timeline post-Blackleaf. The safe houses, the bases you used while transitioning out of the service. Marina rubbed her temples. The memories weren't pleasant. After the operation, she'd bounced between different facilities, enduring debriefings and psych evaluations. Then came her discharge and the frantic search for a normal life. There was a classified storage site in Prague where I turned over hardware, then a holding station in Berlin for final clearance. Back in the States, I spent a few months at a friend's place while I looked for work. I also recall renting a small storage locker under an alias, but I can't remember where. Sasha nodded. That's a start. We check each lead systematically. Could be a needle in a haystack, but we'll try. From the sofa, Madera groaned again, eyes fluttering. The bandage at his shoulder glistened with fresh red. Marina's expression turned grim. He needs more medical care, but we can't just drop him at a hospital. I'm not letting him go until I'm sure we have what we need. Sasha hesitated. If he dies under our watch, we lose leverage. Plus, it might push Regulus to come harder. They'll assume we tortured or executed him. Better they fear us, Marina muttered, though she recognized the logic. If Madera died, they'd lose a direct link to understanding Regulus's next steps. Jonas, meanwhile, was rifling through an old laptop bag, pulling out a portable Wi-Fi hotspot in the ancient laptop he'd used to tap into Madera's comms. Let's not forget technology, Jonas said, booting the laptop. We can cross-reference shipping records, flight logs, real estate listings, anywhere you might have used an alias. But doing that from here is risky. They might trace our connection. Sasha raised a brow. I have an off-grid hack rig in my SUV. It's fairly secure, no permanent IP. We could drive somewhere with cell service, but not too close and operate from there. Marina nodded. Let's do it. We'll load Madera into your SUV. Keep him sedated and quiet. I'm not letting him out of my sight. And if we do find the data? Sasha asked quietly. Marina's eyes hardened. We release it. Even if it costs us everything, we show the world what Regulus is doing. Maybe that will stop them, for good. They spent the next hour preparing. Jonas scouted the area around the cabin to ensure no other vehicles had arrived. Sasha retrieved a first aid kit from her SUV, adding additional antibiotics and fluids to keep Madera alive. Then they carefully carried him out to the back seat of her vehicle, strapping him in place. He offered no resistance, drifting in and out of a pain-addled sleep. If he was planning a double cross, he didn't have the strength to execute it. Meanwhile, Marina and Sasha collected every scrap of gear that might prove useful. Laptops, ammunition, burner phones, the partial files. With the sun rising higher, they could see the forested slopes around the cabin more clearly, vibrant green under a brightening sky. Marina paused briefly, looking back at the small porch. She had once imagined living here quietly with Buck, fishing at the nearby river, sipping coffee at dawn. A bitter ache rose in her throat. That life is gone. They set out in a caravan, Sasha's black SUV in the lead, with Jonas driving the battered white cargo van behind. The plan was to find a secluded vantage point near a cell tower, allowing them to connect to the internet without being easily pinpointed. Sasha claimed to know a well-forested ridge about 10 miles away, where the signal would be decent and the roads less traveled. The journey was tense. Every time Marina saw a car approaching from the opposite direction, she tensed, half expecting armed men to leap out. But they passed only a few civilian vehicles. A mail truck, an old pickup hauling hay, and a minivan with a family who waved politely. The countryside seemed blissfully unaware of the clandestine war stirring in its midst. At last, Sasha turned onto a narrow dirt trail that wound upward through dense trees. Jonas followed close, the van struggling on the uneven ground. Eventually, they emerged into a small clearing with a view of the valley below. A cell tower stood on a neighboring ridge, its red lights blinking. They parked under the cover of tall pines. The air smelled of damp earth and pine needles. Sasha popped the SUV's trunk, revealing a compact but sophisticated computer setup. A rugged laptop, portable battery packs, signal boosters. She carefully connected a small external antenna, then booted up a secure interface. Jonas joined her, hooking up his own devices. Marina checked on Madera in the back seat. He was conscious now, eyes glassy but defiant. Still think you can outrun Regulus? He rasped. She met his gaze. No, we're done running. We're coming straight for them. He let out a weak laugh. Good luck. Marina ignored the taunt. She stepped away, letting Jonas and Sasha do their digital magic. If there was any electronic trail of a storage locker or deposit box under an alias connected to her, they would find it. Her heart thumped with anticipation, equal parts fear and grim determination. The moment they found a lead, she'd follow it, no matter where it took her. They made good time navigating rural roads until they merged onto the highway leading toward D.C. The landscape shifted from rolling fields to suburban sprawl. Chain restaurants, strip malls, and gas stations flashed by. As the traffic increased, Marina felt her tension build. The anonymity of wide-open countryside gave way to congested lanes and watchful eyes. Every so often, she scanned the mirrors, half expecting to see black SUVs tailing them. But aside from a few impatient drivers, no vehicle seemed particularly interested. Jonas stuck close, the cargo van never straying far behind Sasha's SUV. The hours passed in relative silence. Marina occasionally pressed a canteen to Madera's lips so he wouldn't dehydrate, but his fever persisted. She wondered how long he had before infection or shock claimed him. Around midday, they turned off the main highway, following Jonas's directions to a nondescript industrial area. The storage facility loomed ahead, a massive expanse of identical storage units set behind a tall fence. A sign out front read, "Secure it self-storage. We value your privacy." The irony wasn't lost on Marina. Sasha parked in a corner of the lot, away from the security cameras near the main office. Jonas pulled the van up beside them, and the group convened briefly. "We can't just waltz in," Sasha said, eyeing the keypad at the gate. "We need an access code." Marina rummaged in her memory but came up blank. "I might have written it down somewhere. Or maybe we can slip in behind another car." Jonas shook his head. "Too risky. That code might have changed. We could try hacking the gate system. If the facility's as old as it looks, the software might be vulnerable." Madera stirred in the back seat, letting out a hoarse chuckle. "You really think no one else from Regulus is on to you yet? They have eyes on every system. If you trip a hack, they'll see." Marina pressed a finger to Madera's lips, glaring. She loathed taking his advice, but a small part of her recognized the risk. "We need a subtler approach. Maybe there's a side entrance, or we can claim we lost our code. I still have that alias on the lease, right?" Sasha tapped her phone. "I've got minimal info, just the lease records. The staff might let you in if you have ID matching the name. But do you have anything legit?" Marina shook her head. "Doubtful." Jonas gestured to the cargo van. "What if we wait for an employee shift change or a delivery? These places often get service trucks. We slip in behind them." "Could take hours," Sasha pointed out. Madera coughed. "All this trouble just to retrieve a phantom drive you might not even have. Pathetic." Marina clenched her jaw, ignoring him. Finally, she said, "Let's do it the old-fashioned way. Jonas, see if you can hack the code quickly without raising alarms. Sasha, watch for any employees. I'll keep an eye on Madera." They parked the SUV near the perimeter fence, shielded by the building's shadow. Jonas set up a small laptop on the passenger seat of the van, hooking cables into a device that spliced signals from the gate keypad. Sasha stood watch, occasionally peering around the corner for staff or suspicious visitors. Minutes ticked by, tension thick in the air. Then Jonas let out a triumphant whisper. "Got something. Looks like a default override code. I'll punch it in and see if it works." He typed a short sequence, and the gate's motor whirred to life, rolling aside. Marina exhaled in relief. So far, no alarms. The four of them drove in, Jonas in the lead this time, Sasha following. Inside the facility, rows of storage units stretched in uniform lines. They turned at the second row, locating the specific unit number from the lease records. E1247. They parked in front of it. The door was a wide, rolling shutter with a padlock. Marina stepped out, feeling her nerves spike again. If Regulus had tracked them, this would be the perfect moment for an ambush. The wind ruffled her hair, carrying the scent of hot pavement. She turned the padlock in her hand. Rusty, but locked tight. "Stand back," she instructed, pulling out a small set of lockpicks. It took her a minute of careful manipulation, but the lock finally clicked open. Heart pounding, she lifted the rolling door. The interior was dimly lit by overhead fluorescents that turned on automatically. Just a small, cramped space with a few cardboard boxes, a plastic chest, and a battered footlocker similar to the one in her cabin. Jonas and Sasha flanked her. Madera remained in the SUV, strapped in and barely conscious. Marina took a steadying breath and stepped inside. At first glance, the unit looked mundane. Dusty boxes labeled kitchen, winter clothes, and personal effects. Marina's heart sank. Had she truly rented this place just to store old junk? She bent down and opened the nearest box, rummaging through sweaters and mismatched cups. Nothing of value. She stood, scanning for anything more promising. Jonas knelt beside a larger plastic crate. He pried off the lid, revealing a random assortment of items: a camping lantern, a pair of worn boots, a tangle of cables. Sasha moved to the footlocker, gripping the handle. "Locked," she said softly. Marina hurried over, the lockpick kit still in her pocket. She squatted and got to work on the footlocker's padlock, feeling a flicker of hope. This felt more deliberate. Footlockers tended to store valuable or personal items. Within seconds, the lock gave. She lifted the lid and peered inside. A stale odor rushed out. Years of dust and forgotten memories. On top lay a folded military jacket, one she recognized from her final days in the service. Beneath it, an old sidearm in a holster, empty magazines, a half-full box of 9mm rounds. Her chest tightened at the memories. Deeper down, she found a sealed envelope labeled with her real name, Marina Kraus, in faded ink. She tore it open with shaking fingers, removing a single key attached to a note. The note read, "In case you need a reminder, Vault 337, Oak Bridge Bank." Sasha leaned over her shoulder, eyes widening. A safety deposit box. This might be it. Marina stared at the note, mind whirling. Oak Bridge Bank. She vaguely recalled opening a deposit box there, but had believed she emptied it when she left the city. Could she have left something behind? A final piece of the black leaf puzzle? Jonas rummaged in the footlocker further, but it contained only miscellaneous gear. No obvious external drives or documents. The deposit box key seemed the best lead. He locked eyes with Marina. "Looks like we've got another stop to make." Before they could celebrate, a sudden screech of tires echoed through the facility's rows. Sasha tensed. That didn't sound normal. They stepped toward the open shutter, peering out. Two black SUVs roared around the corner, heading straight toward them. Their tinted windows and aggressive speed sent a jolt of adrenaline through Marina. "Regulus?" Jonas hissed. "Could be Madeira's reinforcements," Marina replied, hard hammering. In either case, danger was here. "Move," Sasha shouted, racing to close the storage unit's door. But the SUV screeched to a halt near the gate, men pouring out. At least 4 or 5 in tactical gear, rifles drawn, scanning the area. One pointed in their direction. "Too late," Jonas muttered. Marina grabbed the deposit box key and stuffed it in her pocket. "We have to get out of here. Sasha, can you draw them off?" Sasha nodded, glancing at Jonas. "You take the cargo van, circle around behind them. I'll lead them down the main row so you can slip away." Marina gritted her teeth. "I'll get Madeira. He's still in the SUV." Sasha paused, conflicted. "He might slow us down, but all right. Let's go. Jonas, be careful." As the first burst of gunfire rattled across the storage facility, Sasha sprinted to her SUV, leaping into the driver's seat. Jonas ducked behind the van, returning a few shots with a pistol. Marina dashed to Madeira, who was strapped into the back seat, eyes wide with panic. "We're not done," she muttered, yanking his seatbelt free. She grasped his collar, dragging him out. He hissed in pain, but she ignored it. The clatter of bullets hitting concrete set her nerves on edge. A quick glance showed the armed men fanning out, converging from 2 directions. Sasha's SUV peeled out, drawing some gunmen after it in a squeal of tires. Jonas hopped into the van, backing up wildly. In the chaos, Marina shoved Madeira ahead of her between 2 rows of units. If they could slip through the back fence, maybe they could vanish into the surrounding streets. "Stay low," she ordered, spurring Madeira forward with a nudge of her pistol. His breath ragged, he complied. The deposit box key pressed uncomfortably against Marina's leg in her pocket, a reminder that she had one last chance to end this war. From the humble cafe where one brave soul tried to escape her violent past to the final takedown of an underground empire, this story highlights courage, loyalty, and the unbreakable human spirit. Marina's pursuit wasn't just about vengeance. It became a fight to protect those she cared about and unmask a conspiracy that endangered countless lives. In standing up to Regulus, she rediscovered her own strength and the power of solidarity. Sometimes fate forces us to face who we really are, and in those moments, we find our greatest capacity for change. We hope her journey reminds you that even the darkest nights can give way to a brighter dawn, and no loss has to define us forever. Each character, from Jonas's tireless hacking to Sasha's moral reckoning, played a vital part in overturning injustice. Now it's your turn. Tell us what you think. How did the twists and revelations hit you? Did Marina's grit inspire you in any way? Comment below to share your thoughts, theories, and hopes for what could come next. Let's keep the conversation going.